and go.
Hey, Facebook. Jerry, coming to you from the Rythmia Life Advancement Center in Guanacaste, Costa Rica. I spent the last 10 or 15 days with my kids in California, and my girlfriend. I turned 61 years old, and I'm happy to be alive. Happy to be alive and well. What is Rythmia? Rythmia is a life advancement center that is extremely unique. It's in Guanacaste, Costa Rica, which is a beautiful place, but it believes in a thing called a soul reclamation or soul merger that happens through the use of a lot of these different modalities, metaphysical teachings, food, yoga, meditation, breath work, ayahuasca. We're the only that we know medically licensed ayahuasca, specifically with ayahuasca in our license in the world that we know of. Yeah, it's an amazing place. Over 17,000 guests have come through our doors. 98.85% of them claimed they had a life-changing miracle during their stay. That's 988.5 out of every 1,000 people. Say they had a life. Better than that, at the 6-month mark, 90.22% say this was the week that changed their life. Amazing. Who's been here? Everybody cool. Everybody cool has been here. And who's on our board of directors? Martin Luther King's son, Martin. Michael Bernard Beckwith started the Agape Spiritual Center. Ron White, the comedian. Cesar Millan, the dog whisperer. Jack Canfield, author of Chicken Soup of the Soul. Tony Coe from NYX Cosmetics. Earl Koski, a big businessman, big businessman. Dr. Jeff McNary, Brandy Sabella, all kinds of ultra cool people have been here. Kelly Slater, the greatest surfer of all time, the GOAT. Why do they do it? They're already rich. We don't pay them. Why do they do it? Because this place had an impact on them. That's why. That's an amazing reason, right? That somebody of that kind of notoriety would lend their name to this place for nothing other than to be involved. That's amazing stuff. So this is Go Big number 9er. And we talk about what happens during this process of a soul merger, soul reclamation. And generally, what happens is somebody goes through this process and, you know, they have this big awakening and they make a decision to become a beneficial presence on the planet, to really become a beneficial presence on the planet. And that decision is the start of a new ceremony. And that ceremony takes between 7 years at the absolute shortest to 30 years. You're on this process to really develop the methodology for you becoming a beneficial presence on the planet. And then it's its own ceremony. That event itself becomes the ceremony of your life. Amazing stuff. And here are some of the characteristics of it that we know. It's going to take longer than you ever imagined. It's going to be the hardest thing you've ever done. And depending on the scope and the scale, it's going to generate more great things for you than anything in your previous history. It's a fact. And it's a hard thing. Now, in order to do it, you need to make agreements with yourself that are non-cancelable. So, you know, in the parlance of our times, of our days here, the talk of the times, it's what can you do for me? That is the normal thing. How can I get more out of the government? How can I shake down this? How can I do this? How can I do this without work? That's the talk of our times. This thing works the exact opposite. This has to, the decision here is that I found something bigger than me, and I have to give everything to it. I have to give everything, and then I have to use hyperbolic discounting. In other words, I have to wait to be the last served. It's a really hard thing. Now, to do that, you have to have had a merger, because if you don't have a merger, you'll quit. You'll quit. In other words, if I'm going to do this big thing that's going to be harder than anything I've ever done, but I don't have a compelling merged reason for doing it. In other words, if I'm doing it to get a girlfriend, wrong reason. If I'm doing it to look good in front of the Joneses, wrong reason, because this is going to be the hardest thing you've ever done. And if the reason isn't solidified from a merged place in you, you're going to quit. And the last thing that you want to do. So I tell you, I have all kinds of people here. I have 3 friends of mine who are billionaires. 4 friends. One has just $1 billion, and the others have a lot more money. And one of the things that I can tell you is that their idea of doing something new and different is very short. Their idea of sticking with one thing and keep getting better and better and better at it usually wins the race, because you don't want to be in startup mode frequently. So in Amazon's startup mode, they lost money for 15 years. You don't want to be there frequently, right? We want to be out of startup and getting into mastery, right? But in order to do that, we have to stay when everything in our body is saying to leave. We have to stay. When you lose whatever you lose, and I take this back to a company that I had. So when I was in my 30s, I sold a company for about $90 million. Excuse me, I was 42. I started a company in my 30s. And I want to tell you what that was like. So I was in my early 30s when I started a plastic surgery finance company. And we kept raising money. We went through the dot-com thing, raised money, couldn't make it work. I had a big board of directors who wanted to do it a particular way. I wanted to do it a different way, but I wouldn't quit on that board of directors. I wouldn't. So I stayed and stayed and stayed through hell. And they finally fired me. And instead of me taking a severance, which at the time I think was $600,000, which is a lot of money. I had no other money. I said, I don't want the severance. I want the right to stay in the plastic surgery business. And I opened up in 2001. I sold it in 2004 for 89 million and change. But I wouldn't have got there if I didn't stick to the previous thing until I was fired. I didn't make a decision to leave. I was fired. So I'm going to tell you in this thing, this becoming a beneficial presence, doing it through building a company, a service, a system, a community, a church, whatever you're doing to do that. The mastery that occurs is only after you've stuck through many horrible pitfalls. My friend Michael Beckwith, started the Agape Spiritual Center in Culver City. Well, it started in Santa Monica, moved to Culver City. Now it's in thing. But what's interesting is they'd moved that business 3 or 4 times because they kept, and I say that church 3 or 4, that nonprofit 3 or 4 times, because it gets kicked out of where it's at, and landlords change and doesn't, like, that's devastating. You build a community and have to move the whole community, but Michael Beckwith never quit. He never backed off. And he is one of the best speakers that I've heard in the world, because developed mastery over this thing. So one of the things I teach, one of my these must do's, right, is tithing. And I want to talk about it because when you tithe, you're energetically making spirit your partner. So there's some part of you that is spirit. But when you connect with that in the sense of a gift of tithing, all of a sudden the positive energy shifts towards you. And it's the craziest thing, and you have to do it. Now, most people tithe improperly, and that's why they won't tithe. So you take a regular family making $70,000 a year, and you ask them to tithe from that $70,000 to a church or whoever you decide to tithe to. That is a catastrophe for most families because they already are spending $70,000 a year to live. So you never tithe out of what's existing. Your agreement with the universe is to tithe from the future. I'll give you an idea of what I mean by that. I think I was making, I don't know, 300 grand a year when I had the plastic surgery finance company. And I said to Spirit, look, everything over this 300,000 a year, I'm going to give you 10% of. So when I made that money, I ended up giving up 10% of it away, but not of my base, right? You tithe out of the new thing you're building. So let's say you're a mailman or a mail person, a person that delivers the mail. I don't know the proper term for that anymore, but a person who delivers the mail, and you want to start a healing business on the side. That you've noticed that you have healing energy, and you want to start this healing practice on the side. Well, you don't tithe out of the money that you're making from here. You make a written agreement with Spirit. You write it that in exchange for this, I'm going to give 10% of the new money away. And there's a whole school of thought because of taxes that weren't around when tithing started, that 7% is the right number. I'm going to say it's 7% or 10% after expenses, however you want to do it. But you make that deal and you sign it. And you even put down, I'm going to give so much to the dog shelter. I'm going to give so much to the homeless. I'm going to give so much to church. I'm going to give so much to the Red Cross. I'm going to give so much to this old lady who lives down the street. And you write it all down, and that is your deal with Spirit. And that is tithing to win. You'd be shocked at how when you change that energy, because so for many of us, especially if you were brought up in Catholicism or Christianity, for many of us, we were given this awkward relationship with money that we know it makes us happy, but we feel guilty about it because we were taught that money is the root of all evil, and that a rich man has a less chance of making it to heaven than a camel riding through the eye of the needle. That's crazy biblical stuff. So we were taught this, and we have this odd relationship. But in everything, in the accumulation of wealth or the building of becoming a beneficial presence, right? The building of everything in that is vibrational, and we're sending signals to it all the time. The moment, because we know that giving money to the poor, none of us have been raised by someone who said giving money to the poor is bad. Helping underserved children is bad. Nobody's ever said that. So we know that that's good. Now, if we can incorporate a part of that into our future, all of a sudden we change our vibration with money, with the accumulation of wealth. And that changes everything. That's why tithing to win is one of the cornerstones of becoming a beneficial presence. It is, as is a daily practice, as is physical exercise, as is this list of things that, and it's a short list, but when you agree to it, and anybody who hasn't done that, who hasn't taken an hour, here's how simple that is. I know myself and I know my spending habits, and I'm going to say that an additional $500,000 a year changes everything in my life for the better, and I can focus more on helping others and da-da-da-da-da. My agreement is, and I'm going to make that money out of opening a restaurant or whatever the thing is. My agreement is to tie that and to take your computer and to write out a thing that this is my agreement. I agree to do this to spirit. I agree to do this from my soul. It's an uncancelable contract. And for X amount of dollars that I make, I'm going to take 10% of that money and give it to these charities, and you sign it and date it. Boom. Now all of a sudden you have one of those pieces locked down. It's a terribly, terribly, terribly important piece. Now, I've had people say, well, I don't want to tithe. I don't want to give money to a church, and I don't want to give money to the Red Cross, and I don't want to give money to the thing. I'm going to tell you something. I started my own nonprofit because I didn't want to do a lot of that either, right? And you'd be amazed at how many people are in need of help. There is no, your money will be finite. The amount of people who need help is infinite. So not having a place to go with it is no excuse. There's a million charities out there that are good, that are not big businesses, that help people, help dogs, help cats, help all sentient beings. There's a million. And if you can't find one that you like, start one yourself. Simple to do. So there is no excuse to not tithe. There is none. Right? Because we've taken out the big ones. I can't tithe with money I don't have. If I'm making $70,000 a year and I'm spending $70,000, I can't tithe with that. I can't. But I can tithe with my new profits from my new way of becoming a beneficial presence on the planet. That is my message for you today. I also want to say I have 2 books out, Truthonomics, which talks about that very thing, and Stuff the Moon Said. I don't think I can say it on Facebook, the word, but blank the moon said, which talks about the story of what happened to me in my life in the becoming of rythmia, the coming of rythmia, and all of that. So listen, have a beautiful, wonderful, and prosperous week. Take an hour to yourself and do the work. And then from that point on,